In the summer of 2019, I decided to spend a quiet weekend camping alone at a small, secluded lake deep in the woods of Alder Pines, a remote stretch of forest far from the nearest town. It wasn't supposed to be an adventure. No big expectations, just a couple of days to unwind, surrounded by nothing but trees, water, and silence. The place wasn't listed on any trail apps or maps. It was one of those hidden gems only longtime locals knew about, passed down through word of mouth. My uncle used to bring me here when I was a kid. I'd visited a few times on my own since then, and not once had I ever run into another person. No footprints, no trash, not even signs of a campfire. It was like the world had forgotten about this place, and I liked it that way. That first day went exactly as planned. I arrived around noon, pitched my tent by the lake, and spent the day doing absolutely nothing. The lake was still as glass, and the surrounding woods were calm. Just the wind through the trees and the occasional bird call. I made a simple dinner, watched the sun set over the water, and drifted off to sleep beside the warm glow of my fire. The next morning, I spent hours just walking the loop around the lake. It wasn't huge, maybe a 40-minute circuit, but I did it over and over, thinking about life. By my third lap, something changed. Near the far end of the lake, just at the edge of the tree line, I noticed something in the dirt. Footprints. Bare ones. Pressed clearly into the damp soil, toes and all, as if someone had just walked through. My stomach dropped. I had walked this same trail several times already that day. They hadn't been there earlier. The weirdest part? These weren't shoe prints. They were clearly barefoot, no tread, no sock outlines, just skin and dirt. That side of the lake was steep and overgrown. No one would casually stroll into the water from there. It didn't make sense. I stood there, scanning the woods, wondering if whoever made those prints was still nearby, maybe even watching me. My mind started racing. Had they been circling the lake too? Were they following me without being seen? The prints faced the lake, stopped just short of the edge, then turned and went straight back into the woods. I stared into the trees for a while, debating whether to follow them. But something about it felt wrong. Instead, I backed away slowly and returned to my campsite, glancing over my shoulder the whole time. For the rest of the afternoon, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. I kept scanning the woods, hoping, no dreading, I'd see someone there. As evening approached, the forest grew darker and colder. I piled extra wood onto the fire, trying to push back the shadows. The silence pressed in. Even the usual sounds of crickets and frogs seemed to vanish as the sky dimmed. I tried to distract myself, made dinner, read a bit, checked my phone even though there was no signal, but my thoughts always drifted back to those prints. I kept telling myself I was overreacting. Maybe a hiker had stumbled through earlier, barefoot for some odd reason. But it didn't add up. Then, not long after the sun had vanished, I heard footsteps coming from the trees. Slow, deliberate, getting closer. I stood up fast, heart pounding, and faced the darkness beyond the firelight. The steps didn't stop, they came right to the edge of the clearing. Two figures emerged, a man and a woman. They stopped just where the firelight ended, their faces lost in shadow. I couldn't make out their features. Just silhouettes. They stood perfectly still, not saying a word. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. That's when the woman suddenly turned and sprinted into the woods. The man didn't flinch. He just stood there watching me, or at least I assumed he was. I couldn't see his eyes. I looked down and saw that he wasn't wearing shoes. Just like the footprints I'd found. This had to be them. "Are you okay?" I asked again, a little louder this time. Still he said nothing. Then, just as silently as he'd arrived, the man turned and walked back into the trees, disappearing into the darkness. I stood frozen for a long time, trying to process what just happened. It didn't feel real. It felt like something out of a nightmare. I wasn't about to wait around to see if they came back. I packed everything I could in record time. My setup was simple, tent, bag, a few supplies, so I had it all torn down and ready to go within 10 minutes. I doused the fire, kicked the logs apart, and threw on my backpack. I wasn't going to sleep another minute in those woods. The hike back to my truck was nearly 2 hours. The first 15 minutes were torture. Every snap of a twig had me spinning around. But the further I got from the lake, the more confident I felt. Until the footsteps came back. At first, they were faint. Just soft thuds in the distance, maybe 100 feet off to my left. I stopped and listened. Nothing. Then a few minutes later, I heard them again, this time on my right. Each time, they were short bursts like someone sprinting for just a second, then stopping completely. I never saw anyone. Just the sounds, always out of reach, always moving. My pace quickened. I didn't run, but I walked fast, nearly tripping over roots and rocks in the dim moonlight. About 40 minutes in, the woods went unnaturally quiet. No bugs. No birds. Just the sound of my boots on dirt. Then the footsteps came again, closer now, and definitely human. Not an animal. And still barefoot. They never came right up to me, always just on the edge of hearing, as if they wanted me to know I was being followed. Every so often, I'd stop and spin around, shining my flashlight into the dark forest. But nothing was ever there. My thoughts spiraled. What did they want? Why were they doing this? Was it a game? Or something worse? I started talking out loud just to hear my own voice. Telling myself to keep going. Telling myself it would be over soon. At last, after what felt like forever, I saw the glint of my truck's windshield through the trees. I didn't stop until I was inside, doors locked, engine running. I peeled out of there without looking back. Even now, I can't explain what happened. I don't know who they were or what they wanted from me. They didn't speak. They didn't threaten me. But something about their presence, about how they moved, felt deeply wrong. Sometimes I wonder if they were even alive. I know how that sounds. But I've never gone back, and I never will. In the summer of 2017, I set out on a solo hiking trip deep into the remote Pine Hollow National Forest, about 5 hours from where I lived in Westbridge. I had read online about a long-abandoned fire lookout tower hidden high up in the hills, something thrill-seekers and urban explorers occasionally tried to find. Most posts said the place hadn't been maintained for years, and that going inside was technically illegal due to the risk of collapse. Still, the last update I found was from 3 years earlier, and curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to see if the place was still standing. I found a patch of gravel just off an unmarked forest road and parked. My backpack was loaded with enough food and gear for 2 days. With no marked trail to follow, I relied on my handheld satellite GPS to guide me through dense brush and uneven terrain. The hike took nearly 5 hours. As I pressed deeper into the wilderness, the forest grew thicker and the path rougher. I was betting on the lookout tower still being intact. If not, I'd have to pitch my tent somewhere on the mountainside. Eventually, I caught a glimpse of the tower rising above the tree line. It looked surprisingly sturdy despite the peeling paint and age. I checked the support beams, giving them a few cautious pushes. To my relief, they felt solid enough. The ladder was old and metal, creaking slightly with each step as I climbed. I made it to the top, my heart racing, partly from the climb, partly from the view. From up there, I could see endless stretches of forest in all directions. No signs of civilization, just the pure stillness of nature. The inside of the lookout was modest, a small square room about 150 square feet. A decaying bed sat in one corner, an old wooden desk in the other. The windows, though dirty and weathered, wrapped around the room, giving it a 360-degree view. I unrolled my mattress pad and sleeping bag on the floor, then used my mini stove to heat up a simple meal. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, I stepped out onto the narrow ledge to watch. The sky turned fiery orange before fading to pitch black. Clouds rolled in, hiding the moon and stars. It became unnaturally dark, but I stayed on the ledge for a while, enjoying the stillness. About an hour into the night, I noticed a light flickering between the trees below. It had a strange, orange glow, not like a flashlight. The way it danced and shifted made it look like a torch. Someone was moving through the woods with firelight. That was odd. Who else would be way out here, in such an isolated area, at night, and with a torch instead of a flashlight? I watched the flickering light move for a while before it disappeared behind a thicket. After that, I never saw it again. I remained on the ledge, scanning the forest for any other signs of life, but the darkness swallowed everything. Eventually, the wind picked up, and I started to feel the cold. I stood up for one last look before heading inside to sleep. That's when I saw him. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing below, right between the woods and the base of the tower. He wasn't moving, just standing there, looking straight up at me. Maybe it was the person with the torch from earlier. "Hey!" I called down, my voice echoing into the trees. He didn't reply, didn't even flinch. After a few seconds, he slowly raised one hand, not waving, more like a gesture of acknowledgement, then turned and vanished into the woods. It was deeply unsettling, but I convinced myself it might have just been another hiker hoping to use the lookout, then deciding against it. Still uneasy, I stayed outside a few more minutes, scanning the tree line. But the forest remained still. I finally went back inside and zipped myself into my sleeping bag. The creaking tower beams and whistling wind made it hard to fall asleep. At some point, I did drift off. When I woke again, everything was dead silent. The wind had stopped, and it was still very dark. I lay there confused for a moment, wondering what had woken me up. Then I heard it, the unmistakable creak of the ladder outside. Someone was climbing up. At first, I thought it had to be my imagination. But it came again. One step, then another. I held my breath, listening as the creaking grew closer. Whoever was on the ladder was picking up speed. Heart pounding, I unzipped my bag, grabbed my backpack, and stepped cautiously out onto the ledge. I stood frozen, hoping it was just an animal or maybe the wind, but the sound was deliberate and rhythmic. Then it stopped. No final step. No voice. Just silence. I crept along the wooden walkway, every step making the boards creak beneath me, and peeked around the corner toward the ladder. No one was there. I leaned over the rail and looked down, empty. Not a soul in sight. I stood there, confused and shaken, when suddenly, I heard footsteps circling around behind me on the walkway. I whipped around and caught a glimpse, a dark figure darting past the windows on the opposite side of the tower. I didn't hesitate. I bolted to the ladder and started descending as fast as I could, my hands trembling, boots slipping slightly on the rungs. Halfway down, I looked up, and there he was. A pale face peering over the edge, eyes locked onto mine. I didn't stop until I hit the ground, stumbling as I reached the base of the tower and sprinted into the woods. Somehow, I still had my flashlight and GPS in my pack. I didn't look back, just kept moving. The terrain was rough and unfamiliar in the dark, but I followed the GPS line I'd recorded earlier, pushing through branches and undergrowth. After what felt like an hour, I saw the glint of my car's windshield through the trees. I jumped in, locked the doors, and didn't stop driving until I reached a populated area. I never reported it. I didn't even tell anyone for months. But that night still haunts me. Whoever that was, whatever they were doing up there, they had no flashlight, no gear, and no reason to be climbing that tower at night. And I can't stop wondering, if I hadn't woken up when I did, what would have happened when they reached the top? I'm 25 now, but this happened when I was 22, during a solo road trip up the Pacific Northwest. Back then, I was living out of a compact camper van, exploring remote areas and avoiding crowded cities whenever I could. My name's Kara, and I always found more peace in the wilderness than in urban parking lots where stealth camping brought more stress than comfort. That week, I was driving through the backwoods between two mid-sized cities in Oregon, Crestwood and Bell Ridge. I usually took old forestry roads to find my camping spots, places well off the grid and rarely visited. On this day, I found a narrow dirt road cutting deep into the pines. It had a few pull-offs, all empty, and the deeper I went, the more isolated it felt. At the end of the road was a wide circular clearing surrounded by towering fir trees. It wasn't scenic, but it was spacious and quiet, perfect. The clearing even had a weathered stone ring for fires, although I never light one in rainy weather like that evening. It was mid-spring, and Oregon's skies never gave you a break. Light rain had already started, so I leveled the van and parked. With the side door open, I cooked dinner on my little propane stove, appreciating the earthy smell of damp forest air. As the sky darkened and the drizzle became steadier, I shut the door and cracked open a small window near the rear bed. I settled in for the night, watching a show on my laptop, grateful to be warm and dry despite the storm outside. About halfway through my episode, something unusual happened. A soft glare reflected off the laptop screen from behind me. I turned quickly, but the light vanished before I could register what it was. It hadn't moved, it had just gone out, like someone had turned off a flashlight. My heart skipped. Behind that window was only dense forest, no road, no trail, nothing but trees. I leaned closer, peering into the dark woods, but I couldn't make out anything. Rain blurred the glass, and the night was thick with shadows. I told myself it was probably someone's headlights, reflecting at an angle I hadn't expected, but that made no sense with the terrain. There were no access points behind my van, just heavy underbrush. Still, I tried to shake it off and turn my attention back to my screen. Every few minutes, I'd glance at the window or convince myself I'd heard a noise. The rain drumming on the roof made it hard to tell. Nothing obvious appeared, so I tried to relax. Eventually, I shut the laptop and began prepping for bed around 10:30. I closed all the windows, pulled down the shades, and lay under the covers in the dim silence of the van. But something was off. Normally, I could fall asleep easily in these quiet forest settings. That night, I just couldn't settle. The storm picked up, with thunder shaking the van occasionally. Even if I wasn't scared, sleep was going to be impossible. Nearly 2 hours later, sometime past midnight, I heard something new, something besides the storm. It sounded like movement outside, twigs snapping, branches being disturbed, just once like someone had stumbled. I sat up slowly, staring into the darkness past the window, though I couldn't see a thing beyond the soaked trees. My instincts screamed that someone, or something, was out there, just beyond the glass. Watching. I reached for the window cover and quietly pulled it down again, shielding myself from whatever might be looking back. Then a voice. A man's, low and hushed, like he was trying not to be heard by someone other than whoever he was whispering to. My blood ran cold. I didn't move a muscle. I didn't want to make a sound or show my silhouette behind the curtains. Whoever was out there probably knew the van was occupied, but not who was inside or how many of us there were. For several minutes, I heard nothing but the storm. Then suddenly, there was a soft knock on the sliding door of my van. It was slow and deliberate. A few seconds passed before it came again. Same spot, same force. I stayed completely silent, my breath shallow. Then the man spoke, louder now. Sheriff's Department. Open up. It felt like a trap. No real officer would wait that long in the rain without identifying themselves, and they certainly wouldn't start with a whisper. The knocking continued, followed by more calls, all variations of the same message. Open the door. Sheriff's office. It didn't add up. Why hadn't they used a flashlight, a badge, a patrol car? Why weren't they more assertive? Carefully, I lifted the edge of a curtain and peeked. A shadow shifted near the door, but I couldn't see any uniform. My heart was hammering. I debated what to do, stay hidden and silent or take the risk and drive. I chose the latter. I slid into the driver's seat as quietly as I could and turned the ignition. As soon as the engine started, I heard rapid footsteps rushing toward the van from both sides. A figure darted past the passenger window, just as I threw the van into drive and pulled out of the clearing. My tires slipped on the wet dirt, but thankfully I didn't get stuck. I tore down the trail, heart racing, praying they didn't follow. The forest road was slick and narrow, but I kept going, scanning the rearview for any sign of another vehicle. There was none. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station on the outskirts of Belridge, nearly an hour later. I called the local sheriff's office and reported the incident. They confirmed no deputies were patrolling that area that night. That sealed it for me. Whoever those men were, they weren't officers, and their intentions weren't good. I didn't sleep that night, even parked beneath the bright lights of a busy parking lot. The reality of what almost happened sank in. That forest spot was remote, too remote. If I'd opened the door, no one would have heard a thing. I've continued van life since, but I'm far more cautious now. I stick to more populated spots and trust my instincts every time. I'll never know who those men were or what they planned, but I'm certain I was minutes away from a nightmare. Maybe they thought I was alone and an easy target. Maybe they'd done this before. I try not to think about it too much. What I do know is this: sometimes being far from people isn't as safe as it seems. Sometimes you're not as alone as you think.